Welcome to The Debate. In this series, we're really digging into how contractors can maximize their profitability using expert-level insurance supplementing, and we're pulling all of our insights directly from the material compiled by Latif, the author. We've already gone through the initial steps of the system, but today, we're diving into a really high-stakes scenario, one that causes, I think, a lot of tension for restoration pros, discovering more scope after you've already sent in your first request.
Right. And this is where the strategy really meets the psychology of the job. We're talking about that critical moment when a contractor realizes, oh, I have to submit another request, the so-called second supplement. And the work might even be underway. So the central question for contractors who want to maximize their profits is, I think, this. How do you balance the professional duty to submit all the required scope, whether that's from hidden damage or just an initial oversight, against the very, very real risk of undermining your own credibility, of looking disorganized to the desk adjuster?
And the stakes are huge. I mean, not just financially, but ethically, too. We have to figure out if this idea of continuous discovery, which is just inherent to construction, if that justifies routinely sending secondary requests, or if that whole practice just compromises the professional image you need for, smooth claims processing.
And I'm going to argue that these frequent secondary submissions, especially for things that are preventable, create a kind of friction that just jeopardizes your future success. You have to prioritize credibility.
Okay, I see why you'd think that, focusing purely on the relationship management side of things. But my position is that the use of second supplements isn't just, permissible. It's a necessary function of continuous discovery. It is absolutely essential for ethical compensation and, frankly, for a sustainable business. If you refuse to submit a necessary second supplement, it means the contractor has to eat the cost. And when that cost is averaging, $2,500 to $3,500 in justifiable revenue per claim, absorbing that out of your margin is just an unnecessary and unsustainable tax on being a professional.
I agree. I agree completely that the financial part is huge.
It is.
And no contractor should just eat a legitimate expense. But I come at it from a different angle by emphasizing a constraint. I think we have to differentiate between what we call type 2 items, genuinely hidden or unforeseen damage, and type 1 or type 3 items, which are basically administrative oversights or omissions. Type 2 damage mandates a secondary submission, but a reliance on secondary supplements for administrative errors, missing material tax, forgetting the required waste factor, overlooking the steep slope charge, that just signals a failure to follow the complete data collection checklist that's detailed in the system from Latif.
But if the item is legitimate, why does its origin, whether it was an oversight versus hidden damage, why does that nullify the revenue? Why should a contractor absorb the cost of a missed line item that the policy fully covers?
Because routinely submitting multiple supplements for things you missed initially creates what Latif, the author, calls a timing issue. And that's a huge red flag. It damages the professional rapport you need to make approval the path of least resistance for the desk adjuster. If you're sending 3 separate estimates for one claim, you're suggesting, even if you don't mean to, that you're disorganized or that your first inspection was sloppy. That erosion of trust can slow down every single future claim you submit.
That's a persuasive point about administrative friction. I'll give you that. But I'd argue that the necessity of continuous documentation, especially when it comes to site safety and structural integrity, it just overrides the fear of appearing imperfect. We have to focus on the unavoidable nature of discovery.
Okay, so let's focus on that distinction then, because that really is the core of the disagreement here. Unavoidable discovery versus a failure in the initial inspection.
Agreed. Let's take a Type 2 scenario that happens every day. Discovering extensive decking damage. So imagine your crew is doing a care-off on a simple asphalt shingle job, and underneath they find significant dry rot or, delamination affecting 8 sheets of plywood. This creates what's called an unavailable surface. The wood just can't properly hold a fastener. Now, this damage was invisible during that initial pre-inspection phase. This isn't optional. It's a non-negotiable legal and safety requirement. You can't install shingles on a compromised substrate. The second supplement here is mandatory, and the absolute key to approval is timely submission. You document it immediately with photos showing the condition once the materials are off, and you submit the request while the job is still active.
And I can't stress this enough. Type 2 submissions are necessary. I'm completely with you on that. The moment of discovery, whether it's compromised valley metal or rot at the eaves or that unavailable decking you mentioned, that has to be documented, priced, and sent immediately. But let's press on the Type 1 or Type 3 oversights. You mentioned the IRC, okay? What if your initial estimate missed the required IRC 905.2.8.5 drip edge? Or worse, you failed to include project manager supervision, the LAB super line item, which is a mandatory safety item required by OSHA for steep slope jobs. That's not hidden damage. That suggests a critical failure to execute the revised estimate principles right up front.
It suggests inefficiency, sure, I'll grant you that. But if we're talking about a safety item like LAB Supper, which covers necessary guardrails or anchor points, the contractor has to submit it. It's a matter of legal compliance and protecting your workers. If the claim is for, say, $1,800 in forgotten safety setup and code compliance, is it really wise to absorb that cost just to avoid sending a second email? I'd argue that absorbing the cost is the bigger strategic mistake. The solution isn't to eat it. It's to submit the oversight the moment you realize it, and make sure it's backed by the proper code reference.
But this ties directly into the administrative problem. Let's look at the second point of contention, the impact on the adjuster's workflow and their momentum. I would argue that an adjuster's main goal is to close claims and move them off their desk. Their internal metrics punish administrative friction. If you submit a complete revised Xactimate estimate the first time, the adjuster can approve it with minimal resistance. But each subsequent supplement just increases the administrative burden. They have to reopen the file, rerun internal policy checks, maybe even get a supervisor involved if the new amount goes over their approval limits.
I get the desire to minimize communication threads. I do. But is that desire really worth sacrificing scope? The risk of a claim getting flagged is, I believe, mitigated by how you frame it professionally. If you send a second supplement for Type 2 damage, and you title the email clearly something like Revised Scope Request Unforeseen Type 2 Discovery, decking, and you attach the photos showing the rot, you're reinforcing the image of an honest professional just dealing with the realities of the site. You're collaborating, not creating a conflict.
That works great for Type 2. But let's go back to the administrative failure. The missed steep slope charge, or that missing IRC code. That's not unforeseen. That is a failure of your initial data collection. When an adjuster gets a second supplement for a line item that should have been obvious from the get-go, the carrier's internal system, their algorithm, often flags it. It flags it as a piecemeal submission or a timing issue. And the scrutiny doesn't just slow down approval. It can trigger a formal audit or push them to deny other legitimate items based on policy constraints that they wouldn't have even looked for if the claim had gone through cleanly the first time.
That is a compelling argument about the hidden cost of potential audit friction. But we have to come back to the phenomenal ROI on supplementation. The time spent on a successful supplementation, even if it's managing a secondary request, equates to an hourly rate of, over $3,000 an hour. A secondary submission for $2,000 in forgotten scope might add 20 minutes of admin time, uploading photos, writing a justification, but the financial gain is still astronomical. You don't just abandon thousands in revenue to save an adjuster 20 minutes of review time.
I agree the ROI for successful supplementing is immense, but I challenge the assumption that the second submission is always successful or that the cost is only 20 minutes. You're calculating ROI based on the time spent submitting, but not on the time spent fighting administrative denials, making multiple follow-up calls, or dealing with the slow pay that secondary submission might trigger because of all that increased scrutiny. That's the massive hitting cost that just erodes your margin.
Which brings us right to our third contention, drawing the line. When do you walk away versus when do you absolutely have to submit?
Exactly. A professional contractor needs judgment. We can't treat every single supplement request the same way. If the oversight is genuinely small, say you forgot a $50 administrative fee line item, and your relationship with the desk adjuster is already a bit strained, sometimes absorbing that small preventable mistake is necessary. You do it to maintain the relational capital for the bigger battles down the road, especially if you've already had multiple follow-ups and negotiations, like they detail in Chapter 10. You have to weigh the cost of the friction against the actual monetary gain.
I find that mindset, voluntarily walking away from legitimate money, to be completely contrary to the comprehensive scope strategy that maximizes the homeowner's benefit and maintains the integrity of the business. My perspective is that the professional duty requires the contractor to document all damage and mandatory code requirements found, period. We can't sacrifice safety or compliance. We never walk away from a code item, regardless of cost, because that affects the safety guarantee we're giving the homeowner. We might maybe absorb a minor admin fee if the relationship is fragile, but codes like IRC or OSHA requirements, those are non-negotiable.
I agree that compliance items are mandatory, so the disagreement then really boils down to the administrative oversights. My point is just that the strongest supplements are the ones built correctly the first time. A reliance on secondary submissions, even for a legitimate, non-hidden scope, just introduces a weakness into your overall claim strategy.
But by making the effort to submit, the contractor is acting as a true restoration professional. You're reinforcing the idea that you're not asking for anything. You're presenting what's owed, based on physical evidence and mandatory codes. The effort maximizes the claim value, which helps the homeowner with their deductible and ensures a compliant build. So that line to walk away should be crossed very, very rarely.
It's a delicate balance, for sure. It requires both systems and judgment. The professional has to focus on eliminating those Type 1 and Type 3 errors in the initial submission, and by doing that, they reserve the right to use the secondary supplement only for truly unavoidable Type 2 discovery, without damaging their credibility.
So to summarize my perspective, the professional contractor has to adopt a mindset of continuous documentation. By submitting secondary supplements promptly, ideally during the job, and framing them clearly as unavoidable discovery or legitimate oversights backed by technical evidence, the contractor fulfills their ethical duty to the homeowner and captures the necessary justifiable revenue that should be flowing through their business. You can be professional and thorough while submitting secondary requests as long as they are documented meticulously.
And I maintain that the contractor's primary focus must stay on the quality and completeness of that initial supplement to firmly establish credibility, while genuine hidden damage, Type 2, necessitates a secondary request. A reliance on repeated supplements for initial errors risks the relationship capital you've built through professional communication. Ultimately, it slows down approvals and could trigger denial scrutiny by placing just unnecessary administrative strain on the adjuster.
It's clear that success requires impeccable documentation, both at the beginning and all the way through the process.
Indeed. And we'd encourage our listeners, following the advice in the system laid out by Latif, the author, to review their own supplement processes. You should track how many of your claims require a secondary submission, and then use that data to refine your initial inspection checklist for maximum efficiency and, of course, profit.
Absolutely. This material is part of a comprehensive system that's designed to help contractors increase their profits and apply these very principles. So tune in to the next chapter where we'll continue our discussion on advanced strategies.